Stanford University.
Okay, well, as Connie said, I'm Jeremy Lyon. I run the interaction design team at Palm. So we're the people who figure out what boxes go where and what they do when they get there. I'm going to tell you a little bit of my background because I think it's relevant to what I'll talk to you about. I have no academic background in design. I went to UC Santa Cruz and I got a degree in politics and economics because that's what you do when you want to write science fiction, which is actually what I did when I left college. I tried to start a career as a science fiction writer and discovered that it's actually very difficult. And I decided rather than try to write about the future, I would just try to invent it. That's a lot easier. So that's how I got into tech. So the reason I'm telling you all that is what I'm going to show you today is not officially sanctioned by any designers association, large or small. It's pretty much my personal perspective on the design approach and how to think like a designer when you're building your own applications. So Connie asked how many people had written and published an application. There was one halfway raised hand, but some more people have come in since then. Has anyone done that yet? Gone through that experience? No? Great. How about design courses, either art courses or interaction design, usability design? Anybody taking classes like that? Okay, so you're the one person I have to watch out for. You're the only one who'll see through it. Okay, let me keep going. Okay, so this is overall what I'm going to try to cover today. I think we have an hour and a half, so I'm going to spend about 10 minutes trying to answer the question, what is design? What does design mean for someone who's going to be developing an application? And then I'm going to take 5 minutes to talk about what's special about mobile design, and I'm going to contradict Connie entirely and tell you that mobile design is design, only more so. And I'll tell you what that means when we get there. I want to spend the bulk of our time talking about the specific techniques you can employ when you're trying to think about a mobile application, how to design it, how to make people happy with it. And you'll see I have a stack of paper and some pencils over here. We're going to do a few quick exercises as we go through that to kind of practice some of those techniques. I'm going to spend 15 minutes thereabouts over here on this projector and show you some actual examples of applications on on an iPhone. We'll see some of the things we're talking about and how they were actually implemented in real devices, and then 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. All right, so let's start. What is design? When you hear the word design as it applies to software applications, what does that mean to you?
Layout of the
Physical layout, right? What else?
how the user interacts with it, how it's applied in,
Motion graphics, that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of people say it's about making things look pretty, which it is. That's part of it. It's about testing. A big part of design is sticking people in a lab, watching what they do with your software and learning from it to make it better. And it's about wireframing and laying out the structure, kind of the comments you guys were making. It is about all of those things. And those are all techniques. But what it's really about is really cultivating a state of mind where you think of yourself almost, you put yourself outside yourself and you look at the way you use an application and you think about how to make it easier and better to use. It's a state of mind. So I'm going to draw you an analogy, which is why there's a keyboard here, going back to writers. If you spend any time going to writers' workshops or that kind of thing, you discover that there are really two kinds of writers. There's writers who are writers because what they want to do is express themselves. It's about their ideas, showing their emotions, writing for themselves. And then there are writers who start from that point, but really want to get published. And the whole purpose is to share their ideas with others. And I think that's kind of what applies for software design. There's really, you could write a shell script for yourself, and it'd be the best shell script in the world, and it would solve your problem. Or you could start with figuring out what the problem is that you want to solve, something you feel passionate about, and then applying techniques and tools to figure out how to make it work for people who are not you. So that's what design's about. So if what we're going to try to talk about today is what is design and how to think like a designer, let me tell you what designers think about. So this is, and I'm going to be very kind of high level, and then we'll go into a little more detail if we get into the techniques. So usefulness. This one's hopefully patently obvious and something that everybody thinks about. You know, are you writing an application that actually does something that people want to do? You've got to figure out whether it does what people want to do. And there are design techniques to figure out what people want to do, which we'll talk about later. But that's one thing we worry about. Discoverability. So when I say discover, anybody heard that term before? It's bandied about all the time in design circles. Okay, discoverability means someone picks up your application, they start looking at what's in that application, and they can figure out right away what to do in order to get the things done that they want to get done. That's what discoverability is about. It's obvious. Now, you could make something very discoverable by having a giant button that says start here. So there are trade-offs, and we'll start talking about trade-offs in a little bit. But discoverability is one of those things that really helps people adopt to your application. So we'll talk about discoverability. Usability. This is a giant topic, and I'll talk about a few specific components. But really, all that usability is about is once someone knows how to use your application, once they know what it does and how to make it do that, how easy is it for them to keep doing that? How much friction do they experience when they're trying to use your application? You want to minimize the friction, so they use your application a lot. A guy named Rob Haitani hired me at Palm. He was the original designer of the WebOS. And this was his phrase: usability is a cognitive throughput problem. And he has this great graphic, which I didn't have time to create, but is imagine a half of an hourglass with the sand going through it, or think of it more like maybe ping pong balls coming through. The more you try to shove up at the top, the less gets through. Right? That's kind of the cognitive throughput problem. The more that you show a user in your application, the more that you make them think about it, the less they can actually do with it, because their cognition gets jammed up with all the possibilities. So a big part of usability is reducing that cognitive throughput problem. So the number one tool for doing that is simplicity. Anything that doesn't have to be in your application shouldn't be in your application. And of the things that do have to be in your application, many of them probably don't really need to be there, and you should get rid of them too. So that's one tool. The less you have to think about, the easier it is to understand it. Learnability, another thing that designers think about. This is about, you've made it as simple as possible, you've made it discoverable, but you did something that you failed at learnability if you did something that every time the user looks at what you want them to do, they have to discover all over again how to do it. And the classic example is if you show someone I can do it. If you tell someone to press you tell someone to press the green button, very few people can do it repeatedly because it's red. They see the color, they think, oh, that thing is the red button. So this is poor learnability. Even if you figure it out, you read it, oh, it's the green button, I can press it. Every time they have to make that mental adjustment. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about learnability. So predictability, this is related to learnability, but it's a slightly different take on it. This says that you want your users to get the same results every time they perform some kind of action in your application. If it does something weird, if it resizes the screen on the way towards getting you to your end destination, then people have to think about what it just did. If it does exactly what they expect, they don't have to think about it. And as I said at the outset, all of this adds up to what you're basically trying to do is reduce the friction the user experiences when they use your application. And all of these things that I'm talking about all come down to making trade-offs. And that's the real art of designing an application. Because you can make something useful by adding a whole bunch of features to it, but then it's not very simple. Or you can make something very discoverable by putting the giant Start Here button in the middle of the screen, but it's not very simple because you've got to click here before you can get to the thing that you really wanted to do in the first place. So all of these sort of broad principles that I've talked about so far require making trade-offs between them. And we'll talk about the ways that you can frame the problem you're trying to solve so that it can help you make those trade-offs. Okay, so I want to give an example of what I'm talking about when I say making trade-offs. And I'm going to show you an iPhone and a pre. So how many people here have iPhones? 2 or 3. Anybody have pre's? Yet? No? Okay. Have you guys seen demos of the pre's so far? Have the previous people come in? No? Okay. Well, I'm not going to spend too much time doing an overall demo of this OS, but I do want to demonstrate the two things. So we talked about trade-offs. I'm going to show you the iPhone inbox. Okay, this is the email application. It's an inbox. And I drilled down to this inbox by starting at my list of accounts, and I ended up here. Now, looking at this screen, we're going to talk about discoverability. How would you go back to your mailboxes? Right. There's a button on the screen that says mailboxes, and you go back. Okay. Sorry, my phone's freaking out. The ringer switch broke. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the same screen on a pre. How do you go back to your mailboxes on the pre? I will show you. The screen actually extends down to here. This is a touchable area. And we created a gesture, the back gesture, which if I perform it, will take me back to my inboxes. That was a deliberate trade-off. It's a lot more discoverable on the iPhone. It's really easy to figure out how to go back because they put a big button right there on the screen to show you. But it complicates the overall UI. There's more buttons on the screen, therefore there's more choices that you have to make. And back is one of those activities that you have to do all the time. So on the iPhone, they have to put a back button on practically every screen that they show you. We wanted to get rid of that button. We wanted to allow you to take that out of the context of the application so that we wouldn't have to clutter up the screen with back buttons. So that's an example of a trade-off that we made. Sometimes those are good trade-offs, sometimes aren't. In this particular one, I think it is, but we'll look at some other ones when we do demos. Okay, let me swap back. Okay. Does that make sense to you guys? What I'm talking about when I say trade-offs? Okay, so that was 15 minutes, more or less. 10 minutes, I mean. So now we're going to talk about what makes mobile design different from design in general. And as I said at the outset, mobile design, you have a lot of the same constraints, a lot of the same choices as designing for a big screen, only a lot more of them, a lot more so. The overall constraints are greater. It's that much more important to make smart trade-offs. And there are several characteristics that are unique to mobile design that let you do things that you can't do when you're talking about a fixed computer. So what you're looking at here is a representation of my pre-screen versus my laptop screen. Right? So that's the first constraint that you face with a mobile device, is just the amount of dots of light that you have available to you to do things is a whole lot smaller. And this is actually, this is pixel accurate, so there's one-for-one pixels, but physical size, the dot pitch is a lot more dense on this screen. So it's really more like, about 2/3 that size. So if you're not careful, if you take your desktop application on a big screen and just shove it all down onto a small screen, you add to the complexity of the application immensely. So you have to be really careful. But it also helps you to focus on the things that are really important. So that's one thing that's unique about mobile design. Another thing that's unique about mobile design is your input mechanisms. So that's my Pre's QWERTY keyboard versus my laptop's keyboard. And those are size accurate. So obviously, if you're designing an application for writing novels, you probably don't want to focus on mobile platform because it's kind of hard to type for long periods of time, hundreds of pages on that kind of keyboard. That's the extreme example, but you can pull that into pretty much anything having to do with input mechanisms. So there's another one. And another thing that's unique about mobile applications is the way that people use mobile devices. If you think about, well, like the laptops that are here in the class, right? You bring it in, you kind of set it down, and you intend to sit down and interact with your laptop. It's not the kind of thing that's casual. You've got to take it out of your backpack and open it up, and if you've had it all day, you've got to plug it in somewhere. Mobile devices, people use them very casually in very short bursts. They're subject to frequent interruptions, and they don't ever plan to use it. So the characteristics that are important in mobile design when you're thinking of an application is the kind of thing that supports that usage model. Stuff that, you save state all the time. You always just let things sit where they were because a user might use your thing for 5 minutes and then go away and do something else. So that's another consideration that's really important when you're thinking about mobile. And there are also some opportunities inherent in the idea that this is a device that runs an application that people are going to have with them all the time. So because they have it with them all the time, you can plan on your users interacting with your device frequently and for short bursts a lot. Like they'll be where the person and the device are going to be anywhere, right? And your application can handle that kind of interaction. So, example of apps that do this, of course, is Foursquare or GoWalla, where, it's like those apps wouldn't work if you didn't bring your phone with you everywhere. The other thing about phones is that they contain your life. They contain everything. You have your calendar. They know who your friends are. They know where you are at any given moment. So that gives you, for operating systems that let you as an application developer get access to that kind of data, WebOS does that already to a certain degree, and over time is going to extend that. You can make all kinds of intelligent choices about what you present to the user. There's a ton of apps in the iTunes store, and I think we even have some for the WebOS store also now that do location-based tasks reminders. So you walk into the grocery store and it pops up and says, hey, don't forget the milk. Those kinds of things. So there's a lot of opportunities knowing that someone has that with them all the time. Let's see, how am I doing? Okay, so that's it for what is design and what is mobile design. Before we start talking about design techniques, is there anything you have questions about or want me to amplify on what we've talked about already? Going, gone? Okay. So what I'm going to talk through now is specific techniques you can use if you try to keep in mind some of the high-level principles that we've already talked about. These are the techniques you can use to make sure that your application supports that. It's by no means a complete list. I could spend probably 10 of these classes talking about all the techniques that you use. It's an idiosyncratic list of the things that I personally find most useful. And I'm going to go in roughly chronological order, starting with imagining that you don't have any idea for an application, how to get one, through to the point where you're ready to start implementing. I'm going to go in roughly chronological order, but the truth is that typically this is very much a back and forth process. You start down one path, and you back up, and you do something, and you go forward and back and forward and back. Very iterative. And that's what actually makes it the most fun. And at the end of the presentation, I have a couple slides that talk about other resources that I found, books and websites that I think are useful about design. Okay, so let's start with the idea. So before you can create an application, you have to have an idea for what you want to write. So how many people here already have ideas of applications that you want to write? We got a few, quite a few. Okay, good. So this part will be easy for you. So I said at the outset that developing an application or writing a book or writing a story, you start with the things that you care most about, and then you figure out how to make those work for other people. So the key to understanding what kind of application you should develop is to be self-reflective about what you do, to try to stand outside of yourself and watch yourself do things and figure out what you do well and what you don't and what you want to fix. So what are the things that you wish you could do that you can't right now? It's a good question to ask. Or when do you find yourself cursing at a computer? And what do you curse about? When do you find yourself asking, wouldn't it be cool if ... Or what in general are the itches you want to invent a tool to scratch? What about people around you? You know, people who you care about, friends, family. What do they do? When do they start cursing at the computer? What could you do differently to help them solve those problems? Once you've thought through those problems and you found something that you care about, you apply the reality filter. So you understand technology, you know what kind of hardware is out there, you know what sort of applications or opportunities there are in software. So it's that intersection of your knowledge about what's actually possible and your fantasy about the things that you'd like to have done, which is where the really fertile ground for software ideas comes from. So now we get to the first part where you have to use paper and pencil. So what I want to do is just take a few minutes and have everybody write down some ideas about what you would want to do for an application. So I'll tell you my idea, which I came prepared with, and I'm kind of hoping someone else actually writes it because I really want this application. Is I want a time tracker. I want something that tells me how I actually spend the minutes of my day, but I want it to be super simple. I don't want to have to actually type today, starting at 4:15. I want it to just kind of track all that for me and divide up my day into chunks that it knows about. So something, I mean, that's probably fewer words than I should use, but that's the basic idea. I want a time tracker that automatically divides up my day, tells me how I spent the time, talks to my calendar, talks to my phone, talks to my email, knows how I actually spent my time. Okay, if you didn't have a chance to finish, don't worry. Just have something in your brain for the next step. So you've got an idea. Now you have to turn that idea into a usable application that has all of the characteristics that we already talked about. So I think I asked this at the outset, but I don't remember the answer. Has anybody in here taken an art class? No? Okay. So in art classes, there's this principle: if you're going to sketch something from life, you don't if you're going to sketch a peacock, you don't focus on one tail feather to begin with. The first thing you do is you block out the large shapes of what you're trying to draw, so that you can understand that the overall shape of the drawing that you're trying to make is going to look like. You don't get stuck on focusing so much on one portion of the tail feather that the rest of your design goes out of proportion. So the techniques that I'm going to talk about now are kind of like that. We're going to try to block out the broad shapes of your application without getting too worried about the details to begin with, so that you can have a general sense of the shape of where it's going to be, and so you will focus on the right things at the right times. So there are a few questions that we need to ask. You want to think about your application. You want to think about the users of your application. Who is actually interested in the idea that you came up with? What are your goals for that, for those users? What do you want them to actually be able to do? And how is your application different, either than other applications that are out there that are doing the same thing, or than other ways of performing the same kinds of tasks, even if it's not in software. So I'll talk about my application. So the kinds of users who I think would get the most out of this time tracker are anal retentive types, life hackers. Everybody know lifehacker.com? Excellent site. Virgos, which I am. And maybe lawyers or people who have to actually bill. But I actually think I put this as third because I think these people are the least likely to actually find it useful since they have other solutions for them out there. The goals of my application, number one, I want to show people how they spend their time during the course of a day. Number two, I don't want time tracking to become itself a task and a time sink. And then how am I different than other applications out there? And there are a ton of time tracker applications out in the world. One, just minimal overhead. I want to do as little as possible in order to be able to do this. And I want my application to integrate really well with other apps and with GPS and all that good, fun stuff that we can do these days. So, all right, what have we talked so far? You've got a basic idea. You have a sketch of who your users might be. You have some sense of what your goals for the application are. And you understand a little bit about how your application is going to be different than other people's. So the next thing to do is to do a little research. And what do I mean by research? It's not actually reading books, but that was available on Flickr for free, so that's why I grabbed it. Research is really about talking to people, watching people, showing people what you're doing. So I want to tell you before I get into that, though, what research won't do. Research is not going to tell you what to design, and it's not going to tell you whether you have a good idea. It might tell you if you have a really bad idea, but it's not going to tell you if your idea is good or not. What it will do is it'll set the context for later stages. You've got the basic picture of what you're trying to do, but you don't really understand what it'll look like out in the world until you start talking to people, until you start doing this kind of research. So it's like, I think of it, again, to take a writing analogy, like the backstory for a novel. If you write a novel or a story, the stuff that actually makes it into print is about 1/15 the total amount of stuff you write, because you have to write about the childhood of all your characters who only are on the book for 20 pages. You really have to understand the entire world that you're trying to write about in order to write about just a little bit that makes it into the book. It's the same thing for an application. You really have to understand the context of which your application lives in order to understand how to make the right priorities, how to make the right trade-offs. So it sets the context of your design. It'll help you discover the details. Once you get more into drawing out screens, which we'll see later, it helps you understand the details of that make a difference to people. And there are some very small details that you'll be surprised at once you start doing this, that really make a huge difference to how people perceive and use your application. And it'll help you generate new ideas. You might get out there in the field and try something, and the thing that you thought was most important, that it's low overhead, for this time tracker application, actually isn't that important. What's really important is the integration with other apps, or maybe it's something else I haven't even thought about, like, chimes that let you know when you spent too much time at any given task. So that's what research will do, set the context for it. And like I started to say, the techniques that you employ for research, you don't have to go into a usability lab. All you really need to do is you need to talk to people and tell them, here's my idea, how would you use it? And the key is to try not to lead people, but to ask open-ended questions that allow them to describe how they perceive and interact with, or they think they would perceive and interact with your ideas. Talk to them. Put people in the scenarios where you expect your idea might be useful to them, and observe what they do. Just see how they interact with, if you're thinking about a brand new, that's a good example, a brand new camera application that's going to do, digital zoom or something that people don't have. Watch how they use their camera phones at a party. Just watch how people do it and what they want to do. And if you see that people are always having to walk up close in order to take their pictures, When the composition is better from farther away, that helps you to understand how you could write an application to make them happy. So those are some of the basic ideas. Last thing on that sheet is to just take a few minutes to think about whatever your idea is, how might you learn a little bit more about it? What could you do to go, what kind of situation could you put someone in, or what kind of interaction could you observe that might help you understand your application better? And then when we're done with this stage, we'll share and discuss what people have done up until this point. So the couple points that I put on the board of things that I would want to, ways I might be able to research this idea a little bit better is to like ask people, friends of mine who don't hate me yet, to carry a pen and paper around with them all day long and write down what they do. You know, at 10:15 I started doing this, and at 10:35 I stopped. And then interview them, say, what worked on that? Did you learn anything after you did that for a day? And you know, what was frustrating about it, and what works really well for you? That might give me some opportunities to understand what I could do to help them better. Or you know, one of the things I was thinking about this thing is that it would start dividing up time based on location. So it shows you you're in this location for this period of time. So just talk to people about how they spend their time in the course of the day. If it turns out that people are at home and then at work and then back at home, it's probably not going to be a very useful feature. But if it turns out people do a lot of moving around, they move from one Wi-Fi network to another in the course of the day frequently, it might be a useful way of dividing up time. So what kind of things have, who wants to volunteer to share an idea and the way that they've approached that so far? So the exercise, or the series of exercises, the purpose of this piece of paper is not because this is going to, obviously you're going to be able to transfer this one-to-one to an application design, but it's just a way to help kind of structure your thinking and to start approaching it with a design perspective, approaching your idea from a design perspective. So hopefully that was useful. All right, well, let's go on to the next step. So, so you have a bunch of text and words that describe the kind of application you want to write and who's going to use it and what your goals are for them and how it's different. And now it's time to actually start thinking about how people would use this. What are the different pieces of your application that have to fit together in order to make a whole that's useful to them? So you want to map your application. Okay. So the way to think of this is to think about, and this is actually a term that we use at Palm all the time, but it's I'll describe what I'm talking about. Scenes. Think about scenes. If you think about a scene in a play, it's the place where action takes place, right? The characters do the things that they're going to do. So we think of it kind of the same way. A screen could be a scene. You could think of a scene as a screen. But a scene could be maybe only a portion of a screen. In the WebOS platform, we have something called dashboards, which I'll show you later, which are things that live kind of in the negative space and coexist with an application that's in the foreground. And a dashboard is a scene too. So think of a scene as the place where action takes place. And think about what are the primary tasks that someone wants to do, and what scenes would you have to create for them to be able to do that. How those scenes will connect to each other, like what actions can you take on one scene that will bring you to a different scene. And basically what we're talking about doing is creating a primary flow chart for your application. So before, I will ask you guys to do it, and I have either you can use the back of that sheet or I have some blank paper up here. But before I do that, I'll show you an example of what I'm talking about. See if I can, well, everybody knows the idea, right? I'll erase this now. So I'm just going to draw boxes to kind of represent each of the scenes. So I imagine, I'm just going to start here. I imagine the primary place someone will interact with this application is a dashboard, is something that's always open but not in your face until you want to use it. And all this dashboard is going to do is let you start or stop a specific chunk of time. Start tracking now, stop tracking, now start a different one. So I'm just going to call this start, stop dashboard. And so there's a couple actions. There's, the user can start it or stop it. And it's basically not going to take them out of this this area because at the point where they're starting or stopping activities, they don't want to necessarily see all the activities they've already taken. So I just want to keep them here so they don't have to go anywhere else. So I'm just going to say this is the action you're taking here is starting or stopping. But from here, they probably ought to be able to go to a scene in the application which shows them over the last 24 hours, here's the blocks of time that you used. So I'm just going to draw, I don't have to worry at this point about where it is, but somehow from there, they'll get to, I'll call it a time block list. And probably for any given time block, they're going to want to be able to see details about that, the number of minutes, maybe what the location was, if there are any meetings that coincided with that. So I'm going to call that a time block detail. And they'll want to get to that from the list, and probably they'll get to it just by tapping on it, but I don't have to worry about thinking about that yet. So I'll say time block detail. And they'll have to be able to get back to the list from there. And maybe I want to be able to see this list in a couple different ways. Maybe I want to see just, I want to organize it by location. So there's like some sort of a location view. And maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, phone view that shows me what phone calls I made and how long I spent on the phone. And I'll have to get back and forth between there. And those are, I think, the primary scenes. If I have an application that covers most of that, that's the bulk of my application, most of the things that I want to do. So that's what I mean by creating a map. Because once you create this map, then you can take it and start figuring out specifically what screens you need to do. It's almost like a to-do list for your screens and how those different screens and scenes are going to interact with each other. So let's do that now. Please take the idea that you thought about to start with and figure out how you can map it out. Like I say, if you want more paper, there's paper up here. I'm happy to pass it around. Use the back of the paper you have, whatever. Okay, so what do we got so far? We got some text that describes the application that you're trying to build, along with some details that help you to figure out how to position that application. And you've got a basic map of the different scenes that are going to be involved in your application. So the last part is to really start sketching out the scenes that you are going to build. And I think I won't take time to do that in the class, but I printed out a whole bunch. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. A whole bunch of grids, which are really useful when you're trying to think about how to design an application. This is larger than a pre-screen, but it's the right aspect ratio. And those the big grids are 48 pixels high, which is about more or less the minimum that you really want to start drawing things to be targetable by people's fingers. So those are larger, which makes it easier to draw. And then I have some more that are smaller. You can fit more on a page. These are actual size, so to give you a sense of how small you could really make your buttons and still be able to touch them. So feel free to come grab this afterwards if you think that'll be helpful to you. So when you sit down to sketch, think about patterns. There are lots and lots of software patterns out there that people have employed to solve problems in the past. And most of those are codified in frameworks that you have in any given platform. My iPhone has a framework. We have a framework. Frameworks for things like drop-down lists, or lists for that matter, or the way that buttons look. And you want to use frameworks as much as you can, as much as makes sense for your application, because people come to your application then already understanding how it's supposed to work. They don't have to learn anything. They know they can predict exactly what will happen when they tap framework elements on your device, because everywhere else on their phone, those same things are used. When you, are these guys going to all have the SDK set up for them? Yeah. So as part of the SDK, there's an application called Style Matters. And you guys should play around with Style Matters. Style Matters basically covers all the components that make up a framework, all the different kinds of widgets that you can use in an application. And we found that applications that people who actually pay attention to style matters end up developing applications people like better. So it's a good place to start to see what kind of framework elements there are. But I'm also going to talk about some basic visual design principles that you should just try to keep in mind when you're sketching out your screens. And the object of understanding what visual design principles are is to make what a user looks at, what they have to actually interact with, reinforce the meaning that you're trying to build into your application. That's the whole point of visual design principles. So let's look at those specifically. One visual design principle is called balance. If you notice the way the 3 blocks on the right, they're the same height, they're the same width as the ones on the left. They balance it out. If this block was a lot taller, it would feel imbalanced. Balance reduces friction. When people see a balanced composition, their eyes move more easily across the composition. They don't worry about, oh, what is that thing that's bigger than the others? Why do I have to think about that thing? Rhythm, so the basic unit is a list. You see lists in practically every application that you use. And a list is really about rhythm. I see these 3 things, I know what they do, and I see that there are more of the same basic shapes below that. I can predict what's going to happen. I know if I tap there what, it is predictable, I guess is where I'm getting at. Dominance. So a lot of times when you design an application, when you do a visual design for an application, some things are more important than other things. You can use color, like I did here, to make that thing dominant, or you could use weight, bold versus regular font. You could use shape, you could use spacing. You set one thing off from the others, that will be dominance. So dominance is important for helping you communicate the meaning of your application. And unity, so all of these blocks I've grouped in a single overarching group, and when someone sees this, they know that all these things are related to each other because they're enclosed in a group. Grouping, you can do in many different ways. You can do it with placement, like I've done here, or enclosure, like I've done here. You can do it with color, things of the same color group well. You can do it with weight, you can do it with spacing. So I'm not going to take time to do the exercise now, but like I said, what the next step you should do, if this is interesting to you, is take this application idea that you've got and try to sketch a few scenes, what you think they would look like. Just get them down on paper, because you'll find as you do that, you discover things that when you're thinking about it in the abstract, you don't realize are necessary, or if they're necessary, that you have done them. The last piece to consider is motion. Motion is hugely important in helping to communicate the intention of your design. And the classic example, I'm not going to switch to it yet, but is on an iPhone, to tell you that you're moving down a hierarchy, they show you things sliding. So it starts on the right and slides over to the left. And then when you go back up, it slides back the other way. On a pre, we do a similar concept, but we actually zoom the whole screen. So as you move down a hierarchy, things come from behind you and onto the screen. As you go back, they go the other direction. So think about the use of motion in your application and how you can use it to help reinforce the meaning that you're trying to build into it. But be careful, because too much motion is like too much visual clutter on a screen. It can be distracting, and it can cause people to lose track of what you're trying to tell them to do. So you've done all this stuff, you've done some sketches, you've got a wireframe, you've got a basic concept of what you're trying to design. The next step is to iterate. Evaluate it. Look at your application. Decide what you like about it. Does it meet your goals? Does it satisfy the needs that you identified? And if not, what doesn't work? Try to analyze what seems not to work. Stand outside yourself and figure that out. Go back, draw some more sketches. Maybe you've got the wrong goals. Look at your goals again. Iterate. Keep doing that until you're happy with it, until you feel it's right. And then test it. Especially if you do this all on paper. We have something called paper prototyping that we use all the time. You sketch it out, you cut out your screens, and you put them in a big stack, and you go find someone who's a good guinea pig, and you say, hey, look at this. What do you think would happen if you hit start? And they say, well, I hit start, I don't know, I guess it would start. And you pull a piece of paper out, and you put a new one in front of them, and you say, okay, this is what you see once you hit start button. Is that what you expected? Try to quiz people on that kind of thing. These are sort of the basic concepts of usability testing, but like I say, you don't have to do it in a lab. You can do it anywhere, when you want to. When you're doing this kind of testing, have people talk out loud and express what they're thinking, because that's really critical, is understanding what's in their brains. Try really hard not to help them when they get stuck. It'll be really difficult not to do it, but let them try to flounder until you can figure out what's causing them to be there. And write down your impressions immediately afterwards. This really is really important to actually write down immediately what you saw and what you thought, because you'll forget it within a few hours. And then once you've done that, take your learnings, apply it back to your design, iterate again. At any point in this whole process, depending on your comfort at developing versus drawing, you can always jump in and start developing the application and trying it out, right? And that's especially, as time goes on, it becomes a lot easier to do that as the tools get there. And you'll find that we use Aries, which sounds like Connie said you're going to look at next week. We at Palm will use Aries with some Photoshop files to do a lot of our usability testing, because it gives us the interaction. Someone can hold the device in their hand and interact with it, but it also lets us, take pictures draw it instead of having to do the whole application. And the most important piece of all is know when to stop, because like we said at the outset, everything is a trade-off. There's no such thing as a platonic ideal of an application. So nothing will work perfectly, and you have to use these tools that we've talked about already, who your users are, what your goals are, et cetera, to help you make those trade-offs. And once you've done that, you can know when to stop. Okay. I'm going to try to do this real quickly. I'll show you just a couple of examples of applications, and then we can open it up for questions. This application is called Twee, and it's a Twitter client for WebOS. I don't know how well the colors are reproducing. Not very well. Well, this right here is red, and this is black. Yes, I know. And this is blue, and this down here is gray. So it looks kind of cool. It's slick. It's got sort of this metallic shininess to it. But, we talked about dominance, the visual dominance of certain elements. These things have a lot of visual dominance because of this red color. And they've done that to identify what are retweets. So this is the kind of thing where if you think about a Twitter application, if I think about a Twitter application, retweets are sort of the things I'm the least interested in, right? Someone else's retweets. So I actually kind of want those to be less dominant rather than more dominant. So that's the kind of thing if they'd set out at the outset with a list of goals that said, promote new tweets from people that I'm watching, they might have chosen not to put that as red. The other thing that's about this visual design that's kind of interesting is that with the use of all of these colors, there's a lot I have to process when I look at the screen. I have to understand why some things are gray, other things are blue, some things are red, other things are black, why this is only 2 lines, but that's 4 lines. There's a bunch of different kinds of things going on here that are distracting. So that's Twee. Let's see. That app looks broken. This is a good one. This is a markets application, stock tracker, and let's see. What I want to draw your attention to is I don't think I call this out explicitly, but typically when you look at an application and all the things that a user might want to do with that application, about 20% of the things that they could do are the things they do 80% of the time. And so when you're designing an application, you want to make that 20% of things easy to do, and the other 80% of things you want to take away and not show people. So they really did a pretty good job here of having just essentially 4 buttons that you have to press, or that you can press to switch between the views. And those are probably the things that people are most interested in seeing. They want to see what the market is, they want to know their watch list, they want to read news about the market, and they want to see what their portfolios are. And they want the screen to go off. Just because I'm curious, but also 8 cents, not bad. Let's see. Yelp's another example of an application that is really simple. So I think this is a case where they've done a really good job of eliminating excess clutter. You basically got a list. They couldn't put these all in buttons because there's far too many different kinds of searches you might want to do. But as a simple list, there's no buttons down here. It just scrolls and there's search. They say, what are the things that are most important to you? What do people search for most often? Notice this isn't an alphabetical list. They've actually decided what order to put things in. And put that, I just launched this application. This is the first thing I see. And if I actually start typing, it expands a little bit. You saw that motion that we talked about earlier. It made me feel that this thing was just waiting underneath there for me to focus it. And it drew attention to what I'm trying to do and to what the most important piece of this part of the experience is, which is where is it searching for, right, near the current location. Let's see if I can find another good one to show you. Engadget is an example of a rather complex view. There's a lot of stuff that goes on here, but they've made a choice to provide more usefulness by trying to do a lot of things in this view at the expense. They've made the trade-off to make it a more complex looking application, like, for example, and also interacting. Like, they have this sort of horizontal scroll where you can see their top stories this way, but they also have this vertical scroll view where you can look at all the articles that aren't their top posts. And then they have all these sort of filters down here. So a lot of filters, and they're all iconified, and I'm not quite sure what any of these will do. But at least I get the primary content that I wanted right here up front. There was one more I wanted to show you because it was... See if we can make this not broken. So the reason I wanted to bring up this application is I think this is an example of choosing to go too simple in some ways. And what I mean by that is you'll notice there's no buttons on the screen. There's just a list of cities. And I just installed this application earlier. I didn't pick those cities. They just happened to be the ones that they've decided to include by default. So it's great, simple view. If I just want to see the weather, okay, nice. But how do I add Sunnyvale, where I live, to this? I'm not quite sure. Well, they've buried that in their menu. Actually, even beyond the menu, they've buried that in their preferences. So I have to go to the preferences, and here I can add a new city. This is an example, I think, of taking simplicity too far. A primary action for most people, I think, would be deleting an existing city or adding a new one, and that they've taken off. Okay, I want to make sure we have time for questions, so I will stop showing off applications now. If anyone wants to come play with the pre later, feel free. But for now, what kind of questions do we have, if any? The question was, for a typical project, how much time would you spend in design? For a 6-month project, how much time would you spend in design? I would say that over any given milestone at Palm, we do the majority of our design work in the first third. That's a real rough rule of thumb because it changes a lot based on the kind of project you're working on. Some things are very design intensive, others are not. I was mostly joking when I said you could spend 6 months in design, but we certainly have projects where we're doing polish right to the day that we ship. You know, the map is written way back at the beginning, and most of the screens are drawn early on, but we might be putting the finishing touches on motion literally the day before we ship the product. So it varies. Yes, Connie.
I was wondering if you can share them some things on the web OS that you designed and what your thoughts are.
Okay. Before I get there, it looked like you had a question.
Yeah, so I was just wondering how much of the research phase and the field testing phase do you think would be appropriate to conduct on the actual product itself? Like in particular, I was thinking of Google, how they basically have the mantra of push out the product first, iterate later.
Yeah.
And basically getting the feedback from the users as they use it. So do you think that would be something appropriate to do
For mobile application design? I think the stakes are a little higher when you're talking about a device that's as personal as your phone. So we usually work harder to get it right the first time. There's a mantra which we repeat, but we observe more in the breach than in the actuality, but which is test early and often. So we do try to get something built as quickly as possible and use it, because there is a huge difference between sketch and a wireframe, which helps you frame your thinking, and the actual physicality of interacting with the device. Does that answer your question? Before I show off stuff that I did, is there any other questions? No? So I personally, from a design perspective, because I'm a good boss, I take all the things that are less interesting and let the people who work for me do the more exciting stuff, with the exception of App Catalog, of course. So I did all these preferences. I'll show you an example of one thing that we do differently in Bluetooth than has been done in the past at Palm. And you see it right here. How many people know what it means to be discoverable? 2.5. Half. That's a much higher proportion of the population that out there at large that knows what it means to be discoverable. And it used to be for Bluetooth, in order to make, you had to turn your device on, you had to turn Bluetooth on your device, then you had to make it discoverable, turn discoverability on, then go off and do something else, and then come back, and then pair with your headset over here. So one thing we did is say, really, how often do you have to be discoverable? You're only being discoverable when you're pairing a couple devices together. It's a totally weird name. Nobody knows what it means exactly. So let's just make it discoverable when you go into Bluetooth and turn it off when you leave. So that's one thing that's different about this. I think Bluetooth is just not that exciting, I'm afraid. Let's see, what is exciting? Well, we can do maybe a little comparison. Calendar. So I'll bring up the iPhone because I like to make fun of the iPhone calendar. So people, when they talk about capacitive touchscreen devices like the iPhone, Nexus 1, et cetera, the Pre, they enable you to do something to make interactions with the device a lot simpler than what came before the capacitive touchscreen. If you think about a mouse and a keyboard, right? You have to learn that this thing that I move over here on the side is going to do something on the screen, and there's always that once removed kind of interaction. With a capacitive touchscreen, you just touch the thing that you want to interact with it, and you move it. So, in both these cases, we're looking at a month calendar, right? I don't know why the iPhone's so dark. But you're looking at a month calendar. And they're kind of similarly integrated or similarly displayed. But one thing we did is we looked at it and we said, well, when you're looking at the month calendar, you kind of want to know what's coming up at the end of the month. That's as important as knowing what's going on during the course of the month. So we tried to give you a peek into the rest of your previous month and the rest of the months that are coming below. iPhone, they just show you the current month, and that's it. The other thing that we did is we said, well, look, if you think about this and the way this is displayed, it's kind of a strip, and you can imagine that the calendar, the whole year, goes up and below this. January is up there and December's down there. And therefore, if I want to get to if I want to get to, not the 23rd, if I want to get to May, I just slide up, June, July, or I can go back. So it's this concept of taking a physical interaction and directly manipulating it to get what you want. With the iPhone, and notice, by the way, of course, that the motion that you see also follows the gestures that I make, right? I push down, and so the calendar moves down like you would expect it to do. With the iPhone, you can't do that. When I try to swipe, it doesn't do anything. Same for sideways. It's kind of somehow focusing. Oh, there it did. But if I tap back, I'm tapping left to go to April, but somehow it scrolls vertically when I press left. When I press right, it scrolls, vertically again. So, there. My obligatory make fun of the iPhone. So, let's see, 4:45. I just wanted to go quickly through, I have 2 more slides that are resources that you might find useful. And how is this presentation going to be made available other than on the video? Yeah? Okay. So these are some books that I find really helpful. So Donald Norman is one of the sort of grand old masters of design work. Design of Everyday Things, which has got me interested in doing design work in the first place. And Emotional Design, which is really about understanding the emotional reactions people have to your designs. Those are great books. Don't Make Me Think, this is another, like, it's probably 15 years old at this point, but it's a classic book that talks about website design. And from the title, as you can guess, it's all about how you do things so people don't have to think about your design and can just interact directly with your content. The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. Alan Cooper runs a design firm here in the Valley, and what this is really good for is talking about personas and understanding the users that are going to be interacting with your application. As developers, you may find it a little annoying because he's also, at the same time as he's writing this book and telling you about how to use personas, he's telling you that designers should be at the forefront of application creation. So take it with a grain of salt. And this is the grab bag results down here. Bruce Sterling is a science fiction author. I don't know if anybody's read him, but he's a great writer. These 2 are nonfiction books. Shaping Things is a book he wrote when he was at Caltech that's about sort of industrial design and trying to imagine industrial design in a world where people have fabricators in their houses and can create pretty much anything they want. Tomorrow Now is thinking about the next 50 years of the physical environment and what we'll be living in. His attempt to do that. Tomorrow Now will blow your mind. It's great. And these are a few websites. Interaction Design Association. It's the sort of professional group for interaction designers, but they have lots of great material up on their website. If you start using Photoshop or any of the Adobe products for designing, lynda.com is great. I mean, you have to pay for it, but they have great online tutorials and videos for how to use those apps. Jared Spool at UIE, sort of another of the grand old masters who's really focused on usability testing. He's the king of test early and often. There's lots of good material here. That's kind of their blog. And again, the grab bag answer. Adaptive Path is a design firm that I've worked with in the past, and their blog is a really fun sort of collection of design ideas and thoughts. This is where you'll find the key to using stickies to do everything. If you ever get into design, you'll find stickies are an invaluable tool. And that's it. So thank you very much.
For more, please visit